Margaret Hayes spent thousands on treatments while dark age spots consumed her confidence, making her feel invisible to the world she once belonged to. Her own niece Jessica whispered cruel words at a family party, calling her embarrassing and claiming she had let herself go, not realizing Margaret stood close enough to hear every heartbreaking syllable. But a chance discovery online led Margaret to a $6 bottle of apple cider vinegar that dermatologists never mentioned, a simple remedy that would transform not just her skin, but her entire life. Just listen to how this shocking turn of events unfolded and why justice ultimately prevailed in the most unexpected way. The gray October morning in Boston brought steady rain against Margaret Hayes' apartment windows. She stood before the bathroom mirror, the harsh fluorescent light revealing every detail she wished remained hidden. At 72, Margaret stared at a reflection that felt like a stranger. Dark age spots covered her hands and face like an unwelcome map of years she wanted to erase. Her fingers traced the largest mark on her right cheek, remembering when it first appeared weeks after Robert's funeral 5 years ago. What started as one small spot had multiplied, spreading across her hands, up her forearms, along her neck, and finally across her face. The medicine cabinet held expensive creams and serums representing thousands of wasted dollars. She reached for one elegant bottle promising radiant skin, remembering 3 months of religious application that changed nothing. Her reflection showed more than physical marks. Margaret saw the invisible weight of loneliness that had settled since Robert's death. Her daughter Emily's calls had dwindled to brief check-ins every few weeks. Grandchildren Tommy and Sarah visited only on holidays now, their presence feeling obligatory rather than genuine. Last month's discovery that former colleagues had organized a reunion without inviting her had deepened the wound. She'd seen photos online from Antonio's Italian restaurant, familiar faces laughing together while she'd been forgotten. 40 years teaching at Lincoln Elementary, apparently erased from everyone's memory. Margaret turned on the faucet, cold water rushing over her spotted hands. Her mind returned to Saturday evening at Dorothy's birthday party at the Harbor View restaurant. She'd arrived hopeful in her best navy dress and Robert's pearl necklace, ready to reconnect with family. The party had started well. Sunset painted the harbor in orange and pink. Dorothy embraced her warmly. For an hour, Margaret actually enjoyed herself, sharing stories with cousins. Then came the moment that shattered everything. Reaching for napkins at the dessert table, Margaret heard voices behind the floral centerpiece. Her niece Jessica was speaking to a friend, words floating over like poison. "Look at Aunt Margaret. She looks terrible with those spots everywhere. Mom says she's really let herself go since Uncle Robert died. Honestly, it's embarrassing when she comes around in public." Margaret's hand froze. Her chest tightened as a restaurant noise faded to muffled buzzing. She carefully set down her plate, retrieved her handbag, and walked to the exit. No one noticed her leaving. Outside, cool air hit her face. 2 blocks later, she flagged a taxi. Once inside, tears flowed freely down her cheeks. The kind-eyed driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror, but said nothing during the 20-minute ride home. Back in her apartment, Margaret pulled the oldest photo album from the bookshelf. Her wedding day 38 years ago showed her at 34, radiant in white, skin glowing, smile genuine. Robert stood beside her, looking at her with such love it made her chest ache now. She turned pages slowly, watching her younger self smile from beaches and holidays. Their 25th anniversary trip to Maine showed them on a rocky beach, Robert's arms wrapped around her from behind. She remembered his words, "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." Now Robert lay under granite at Mount Hope Cemetery. The spots had started appearing weeks after his funeral, as if her body was manifesting grief physically. Next morning, Margaret woke exhausted despite 10 hours of sleep. She made coffee mechanically, the familiar ritual feeling pointless. Who was she making coffee for? Who cared if she got up at all? Her phone rang, showing Dorothy's name. Margaret let it ring, watching the screen go dark. A text appeared. "Maggie, are you okay? Call me when you get this." Margaret set the phone face down. Evening found her on the couch with her tablet, scrolling through social media without purpose. Then something caught her eye in the Silver Years Strong group. Betty Morrison from Philadelphia had posted 2 side-by-side photos. The first showed hands covered in dark spots remarkably similar to Margaret's. The second, taken 2 months later, showed the same hands dramatically clearer. Margaret sat up, heart quickening with unfamiliar hope. Betty described decades struggling with age spots, countless expensive treatments delivering only disappointment. Then she discovered apple cider vinegar quite by accident. Mixed with equal parts water and applied twice daily, it had transformed her skin over 2 months. Margaret read the post 3 times. Could something so simple actually work? She scrolled the comments, expecting skepticism. Instead, dozens of women shared similar success stories, posting their own before and after photos. Sarah from Austin, Linda from Chicago, Patricia from Denver, all confirming results. Several emphasized consistency and patience, but the consensus was clear. It worked. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. Thoughts spinning between Jessica's cruel words and Betty's transformative photos. She imagined looking in the mirror and recognizing herself again. Next morning, Margaret walked 3 blocks to the grocery store with renewed purpose. In the health food section, she found organic apple cider vinegar from Bragg, the brand Betty mentioned. $6.49. She'd spent over $3,000 on dermatology treatments. The irony made her smile. Home again, Margaret's hands trembled as she poured vinegar into a measuring cup, adding equal parts water. The sharp smell filled her kitchen. She soaked a cotton pad and stood before the bathroom mirror, pressing it against the largest spot on her right hand. Cool liquid tingled against her skin, not painful but noticeable. She applied solution to each spot on her hands, arms, neck, and carefully to her face, avoiding her eyes as Betty had warned. After 10 minutes, she rinsed with cool water and applied moisturizer. Margaret repeated the process that evening, next morning, and every day after. She set phone reminders and photographed her spots from multiple angles to track changes. The first week brought nothing. Spots remained dark and prominent. By day 6, doubt crept back. Maybe this was another false promise. On day 7, Margaret almost quit. But stubborn determination, the same quality that sustained 40 years of teaching, made her continue. Day 8 changed everything. Washing hands after breakfast, Margaret noticed something different about the large spot on her left wrist. Under bathroom light, there was no mistaking it. The spot had faded. Not dramatically, but noticeably lighter than surrounding marks. Margaret's throat tightened with emotion. After 8 days, a $6 bottle of vinegar was producing results expensive treatments never achieved. She took photos, comparing them to week-old images. The difference was subtle but undeniable. Energy surged through her. Margaret applied more solution immediately, then retrieved a notebook to document everything. She increased applications to 3 times daily, following advice from Betty's commenters. One woman named Grace recommended adding honey to make it gentler. Margaret stirred raw honey into her next batch, creating a consistency that adhered better to her skin and smelled less harsh. The honey modification made treatments comfortable rather than something to endure. Margaret began looking forward to each application, studying her skin with renewed interest, celebrating tiny victories, believing for the first time in years that real transformation was possible. After 3 weeks of daily apple cider vinegar applications, Margaret noticed changes that could no longer be dismissed as lighting tricks or wishful thinking. She stood by her kitchen window one early November morning, holding her hands up to examine them in natural light. The dark spots that had covered the backs of her hands in dense patterns now appeared significantly lighter. Some of the less intense ones had practically blended into her natural skin tone. Margaret ran her fingers across her skin, as if touch could confirm the visual changes. She couldn't believe that a simple home remedy had achieved in 3 weeks what years of expensive procedures had failed to accomplish. The largest spot on her right hand, previously almost brown, had faded to a light beige, barely distinguishable from the surrounding skin. She felt something igniting inside her that had been dormant for so long, hope mixed with gratitude and growing confidence. Impulsively, she grabbed her phone and dialed Dorothy's number. It was only 7 in the morning, but Margaret couldn't wait. After the 4th ring, her sister answered in a sleepy voice. "Maggie, is everything okay? Did something happen?" "Dorothy, sorry for waking you, but I had to tell you." Margaret's voice trembled with excitement. "Remember I told you about the apple cider vinegar? It's working. The spots on my hands have almost disappeared." Sartutsoin. She heard rustling on the other end, and Dorothy responded in a more alert tone, with obvious skepticism. "Maggie, honey, I'm glad you think so, but maybe you're wanting to see results too badly? Remember, you've tried so many treatments before." Margaret had expected this reaction. "I know how it sounds, but it's real, Dorothy. I've been keeping a journal with photos. Give me a minute, I'll send you pictures. Without waiting for a response, Margaret opened her camera app and took several clear photos of her hands in good lighting. Then she found images from 3 weeks ago in her gallery and sent both sets to Dorothy via text. The next few minutes dragged painfully as her sister examined the images. Finally, the phone rang again. Margaret! Dorothy's voice sounded completely different, with notes of amazement and delight. This is incredible. The difference is obvious even in photos. How did you do this? Tell me everything from the beginning. Margaret felt tears of joy streaming down her cheeks as she recounted the entire story to her sister, from the chance discovery on social media to the daily procedures with diluted vinegar. Dorothy listened attentively, asking clarifying questions about proportions, frequency of application, and possible side effects. I want to try this myself, Dorothy said at the end of the conversation. I have several spots on my hands, and if it's this effective, it would be foolish not to use it. Encouraged by her sister's support and the obvious results on her hands, Margaret decided to expand the treatment. Until this point, she had focused mainly on her hands and forearms, only occasionally applying the solution to her neck. Now she decided to tackle the spots on her face, the very marks that most affected her appearance and self-esteem. Her face required a more delicate approach. Margaret remembered Betty Morrison's warning that the skin around the eyes was extremely sensitive and could become irritated from vinegar. She decided to prepare a gentler solution for her face, mixing 1 part vinegar with 2 parts water instead of the usual 1-to-1 ratio. To this mixture, she added slightly more honey, creating a consistency that was liquid enough to apply, but thick enough not to drip and get into her eyes. Each evening, after washing her face and before bed, Margaret sat before the bathroom mirror with a cotton pad soaked in the diluted solution. She started with the area around her jawline, carefully dabbing each spot, then slowly moved upward to her cheeks, temples, and forehead. She left the area around her eyes untouched, unwilling to risk it. The procedure took about 10 minutes, and Margaret transformed it into a kind of meditative ritual time when she could focus on herself and her healing. The first 2 weeks working on her face brought modest but encouraging results. The spots didn't fade as quickly as on her hands, perhaps because facial skin was thinner and more sensitive, or because she used a weaker solution. But Margaret had learned patience. She saw progress on her hands and knew that time and consistency were key factors. By early December, 2 months from the day she bought her first bottle of apple cider vinegar, Margaret stood before the same bathroom mirror, but looked at a completely different reflection. The dark spots on her face that had made her look much older than her years had diminished so much they were barely noticeable. Several of the lightest spots had disappeared completely. Her skin had acquired a more even tone, and her complexion, which for months had seemed dull and grayish, now looked healthy and fresh. Margaret didn't immediately realize how dramatic the changes were, because she saw her face every day, and the transformation happened gradually. But one morning in mid-December, everything became obvious. It was an ordinary Sunday. Margaret decided to stop by her favorite coffee shop, Brew and Bean, on the corner of Commonwealth Avenue, a place she'd visited for years but had avoided recently due to insecurity about her appearance. Today, for the first time in a long while, she felt comfortable enough to leave home without anxiety about people staring at her spots. The coffee shop was crowded on Sunday morning. Margaret stood in line, studying the menu board, although she always ordered the same thing, an almond milk latte. She was lost in thought when she felt a light touch on her shoulder. Turning around, Margaret saw a young woman, perhaps 25, with a kind face and genuine smile. "Sorry to bother you," the girl began somewhat shyly, "but I couldn't help noticing what beautiful skin you have. It's absolutely glowing." Margaret froze, not knowing how to react. She hadn't heard compliments about her appearance in years, especially about her skin. For a second, she thought the girl might be addressing someone else. But no, she was looking directly at her, waiting for a response. Thank you," Margaret finally managed, feeling her cheeks flush. "That's very kind of you to say." The girl continued, her words becoming more enthusiastic. "No, really, my grandmother has been struggling with age spots for years, and we've tried so many products, but nothing helps. She's so self-conscious about it. Would you mind sharing what products you use? I'd love to get something similar for her." In that moment, Margaret felt something inside her shift. She thought about herself months ago, about her desperation, about the humiliation at Dorothy's birthday party, about endless, failed attempts to find a solution. Now a stranger was asking her advice, seeing her as an example of what could be achieved. This was so far from her recent reality that Margaret momentarily lost her voice. "It's apple cider vinegar," she finally said, and her voice strengthened as she continued. "Organic, unfiltered apple cider vinegar diluted with water. I know it sounds too simple, but it really works." The girl's eyes lit up with hope and interest. She pulled her phone from her pocket. "Could you tell me more? How exactly do you use it? How long did it take to see results?" Margaret described the entire process in detail: the mixing proportions, frequency of application, adding honey to soften the effect, the importance of patience and consistency. The girl recorded every detail, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Other people in line began showing interest in their conversation, and Margaret noticed several women listening to her words. "This is incredible," the girl said, finishing her notes. "I'm buying vinegar for my grandmother today. Thank you so much for sharing. You have no idea how much this means to us." Margaret left the coffee shop with a smile on her face. For the first time in years, she felt useful and visible. She had helped someone, shared knowledge that might change another person's life the way her own had been changed. The feeling was intoxicating. The next day, Emily called. Dorothy had told her about her mother's transformation, and her daughter insisted on a visit. When Margaret opened her apartment door, Emily froze on the threshold with her mouth open. "Mom, you look incredible. What did you do?" Margaret led her daughter to the kitchen and told the whole story. She showed her the before and after photos, the bottle of vinegar, and her observation journal. Emily listened, shaking her head in amazement. At the end of the conversation, she hugged her mother and apologized for calling so rarely and not noticing how hard things had been for her. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Emily said, tears in her eyes. "I got so caught up in my own life with work and the kids. I should have checked in more. Should have noticed you were struggling. You look amazing. But more than that, you seem happy again, like yourself." A few days later, Margaret received a message from Jessica. Her niece wrote that Dorothy had told her about her aunt's transformation, and she wanted to apologize for her words at the birthday party. Jessica admitted she hadn't thought Margaret would overhear, and she felt terrible about it. Margaret responded that she forgave her, and that those words, strangely enough, had become a catalyst for change. "Thank you for being honest," Margaret wrote back. "Sometimes we need to hear difficult truths to find the motivation to change. You helped me more than you know." With her confidence restored and her skin dramatically improved, Margaret felt inspired to do more than just enjoy her personal transformation. She wanted to share her discovery with others who might be suffering the same way she had. She created a blog called Second Bloom, where she documented her journey with natural skincare remedies. Her first post detailed the entire experience, from the devastation of Jessica's overheard comments to the discovery of Betty Morrison's post, through the daily applications and gradual improvements to the final results. She included photos documenting her progress and provided detailed instructions for anyone wanting to try the method themselves. She emphasized patience, consistency, and realistic expectations. The blog post went viral within days. Hundreds of women commented, sharing their own struggles with age spots and thanking Margaret for her honesty and practical advice. Many started their own vinegar treatments and began reporting back with their results. Margaret found herself at the center of a growing community of women supporting each other through their skincare journeys. She posted regularly, responding to questions, offering encouragement, and sharing additional natural remedies she had researched. The blog became more than just a skincare resource. It evolved into a space where women over 60 could discuss aging, self-esteem, and reclaiming their confidence in a society that often made them feel invisible. When Margaret had her next appointment with Dr. Harrison 3 months after starting the vinegar treatment, the doctor did a double take when she entered the examination room. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, studying her face carefully, "your skin looks remarkably improved. What exactly have you been doing?" Margaret described her method in detail. Dr. Harrison listened with genuine interest, occasionally making notes. "I'll be honest with you," he said when she finished. "I've never taken folk remedies very seriously. We're trained to rely on pharmaceutical solutions and medical procedures. But your results speak for themselves. The improvement is undeniable." He asked permission to document her case and mentioned wanting to reference it at an upcoming dermatology conference, as an example of effective, accessible natural solutions. Too often we overlook simple answers because they seem too good to be true, he admitted. Your case is a valuable reminder that sometimes the old ways work better than we give them credit for. 6 months after buying her first bottle of apple cider vinegar, Margaret was almost unrecognizable, not just physically, but in spirit. Her skin radiated health, and her confidence had returned stronger than before. She joined a yoga class for seniors at the community center, started attending a book club at the local library, and even agreed to a coffee date with William, a widower Dorothy had introduced her to. William was 74, a retired architect who had lost his wife 3 years earlier. Their first coffee date turned into a 3-hour conversation about everything from classical music to grandchildren to the challenge of rebuilding life after loss. He called her the next day to ask if she'd like to go to a concert at Symphony Hall. At the Lincoln Elementary School reunion, which organizers finally invited her to after seeing her posts on social media, former colleagues couldn't believe they were looking at the same Margaret Hayes. She radiated life energy and talked about her new pursuits with such enthusiasm that many asked for her contact information to learn the secret of her transformation. It's not just about the skin, Margaret told her former colleague Janet Williams over Punch. The spots were a symptom of something deeper. I had stopped caring about myself, stopped believing I mattered. The vinegar was just a catalyst. It gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. Standing in the school gymnasium, where she'd chaperoned countless dances and events over 40 years, surrounded by people who now wanted to reconnect with her, Margaret felt a profound sense of gratitude. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from invisible widow to vibrant woman, creating a new chapter of her life. Margaret realized the problem had never been just about the spots on her skin. She had lost herself after Robert's death, stopped taking care of herself, stopped believing she deserved happiness or attention. The apple cider vinegar had become a catalyst that returned her to life. A simple, inexpensive remedy she learned about by chance had given her far more than clear skin. It had returned her dignity, hope, and desire to live fully. Now, looking in mirrors, Margaret no longer saw an invisible old woman. She saw a strong woman who had passed through pain and humiliation and emerged victorious. She was grateful to Betty Morrison for that life-changing post, to Jessica for words that had sparked her transformation, and to herself for not giving up. Life had given her a second chance, and she had no intention of wasting it.